Coming up, Camilla will be speaking with Ofir and Lissette from No Fear Counselling in Burnaby, and today they are talking about how to resolve conflict in relationships. So please have a look.
In our studios, it's my pleasure once again to introduce to you Ofir and Lissette. Both are counselors at No Fear Counselling Services. It's in Burnaby. So, welcome both of you.
Thanks for having us again.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time today to come in. And it's the last episode that we did, and we do this episode once a month. We got a caller from, and he wanted to talk about, I think he mentioned conflict resolution. So my take on that was he was talking about conflict resolution maybe in relationship. So since you've been here, I was going to ask you, and they wanted me to ask you, what happens if one person wants to resolve whatever conflict they're having and one person is not ready to talk about it? How do you deal with that? So please.
Yeah, so conflict I think is sort of this big word. I think in the way that we think of conflict in general, we think of it as a bad word. Or it has a bad connotation. There's something that, it's almost when I say conflict, something to stay away from, at least for myself. But in the way that we work with conflict, we try to sort of reframe it and change the meaning of it to turn it into something of an opportunity, something to look at and to open up and to learn about the other person as opposed to close off and run away from.
So there are two kinds of individual. One would like to talk, and the other party may be, sometimes conflict when you talk about anything, they don't engage. They think it's better not to talk about it, either do not want to confront that or not prepared to hear what the other party has to say. So maybe Lissette, you want to say, in a case like that, how would you talk to them if they happen to be your client?
Right. So I think the number one thing that we like to do, I know Fear does too, is create safety. So creating safety in our counseling space is really important, and that's going to be the first step towards engaging the client to come forward and to express any sort of conflict that they may be having at that moment with the other partner. Having said that, oftentimes, one person, like you said, is more likely to be the one kind of pushing or kind of, starting the conversation, and the other one tends to sit back or kind of stonewall, as we call it. And in those cases, it's really about helping them to find a place where they are safe enough to express themselves and to express what's really bothering them or what's really at the heart of the situation, of the conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on that word safety. I think if someone is conflict averse, they're scared of conflict, I would think that they must have had some bad experiences with conflict, that for whatever reason it didn't go so well, and then that led to some kind of pain. And that pain, understandably so, is something that all of us, we want to stay away from. And so we try to understand what it is that is at the heart of that fear for them, and we try to make it normal, right? We try to hear and open up that whatever resistance to instead of again thinking of it as conflict, to interact in a way that makes that old experience a new, more corrective experience. They want to have a good experience so that is something that's reinforced next time, and so they're not running away from that conflict again. And just that word can be completely flipped on its head if they have some good experiences come out of it.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Ofir, I think part of the therapist's job is to really validate that for the client.
Yes.
And to really understand where they're coming from, why it's scary to go there, and they may have really good reasons why they're not able to open up and to talk about, the things that they need to talk about. But it's really our job to create that space for them, to make it safe for them enough to express.
I was also conflict may be meaning disagreement. We both agree to disagree, right? So maybe what we can talk in here about is, if you feel between two parties, and that can happen at workplace, it could happen anywhere, that you can sense that there is a disagreement, is it better to get it resolved or talk it out sooner than later? Then it's if you don't have it resolved, not resolved by meaning that if you don't talk it over, you don't know what I'm thinking in my mind. I don't know what Ofir is thinking, sitting in here thinking, unless we don't speak up, right? So do you think even if you have the slightest idea that there is something happening, to call it out, speak it up, what?
I think you make a really good point in that if we don't address an issue can generally gets bigger, and cycles generally get bigger. And so, in a conflict, that just by definition takes at least two people. And two people, the thing that bridges the two people together is the way that they communicate, verbally, non-verbally, gestures, tones, everything that goes with that. And like you said, intention is not always expressed very clearly.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, I would say at least 95% of the time from my experience, any conflict, any escalation, any kind of butting heads, it all has to do with this sense of miscommunication, misperceiving, misunderstanding the other person's intention, and sort of reading into their behavior, and being triggered by it, again, understandably so if you look at that person's history, why they would be triggered. But in the way that we're generally triggered, we usually react in a way that's counterproductive to resolving the issue, and then it feeds into the cycle instead of actually opening up that cycle and learning about the other person. And actually, by looking into it, you're able to understand that other person more, and you're able to create a connection once you do understand that other person more, and not just resolve the conflict, but actually create something real there.
Conflict can also be the body language. It's unspoken body language. Doesn't have to be said anything.
Yep,
the
absolutely.
work, the movement and all that, that also can be perceived that
That's right.
there is something happening in here, right? So unless
Absolutely.
we don't say nothing, I
We
mean,
just
don't
assume.
talk about it,
Yeah.
you're just assuming, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So Camila, I think what you're saying too is that sometimes when we don't speak up, we can really show that we're, in disagreement or that we're not happy about something by just our body language and our
Yeah.
tone and our gestures. So that really comes through when you hold that in instead of expressing it.
And then with that, the other person that's seeing you holding back, all they know is that there's something wrong, and they don't know why. They don't know exactly what's wrong. They don't know what that other person's feeling. That person might have been reinforced their whole life for not showing that they're actually upset, or that they're actually sad, or that they're actually hurt. But if they did in this relationship, in a way that actually pulls the other person in, if they are able to do that, it could pull them in. They get to know what it was that happened that triggered them, and that's generally better, especially if it's done in a way that's vulnerable, that like I said, pulls the other person in, as opposed to going with that behavior, having the other person make that assumption, and oftentimes, like we said, the incorrect assumption. Right?
And also some people, that's the only thing they have learned in life, that if they feel there is something is happening or something they are not happy with, and to withdraw is the only way to resolve the attention or
Right.
the problem or the issue, because they haven't never learned any other way of resolving the conflict, right?
That's right.
Or disagreement or whatever you call it.
Yeah, withdrawing is one of several different ways that people learn to cope.
Yeah.
And, it might have been the best situation, the best thing that they could have done to protect themselves. They might have tried something different and that didn't work, but withdrawing did protect them. And in that moment in time, and that maybe whole period of their time, withdrawing saved their life. And of course then, because that was reinforced so many times, today in their adult relationships, their friendships, their work relationships, withdrawing, again, protects them, but it can create other problems because they might not want to withdraw. There might be a situation that they do want to engage. By withdrawing, they might be distancing themselves from their partner and other people, and that might have other costs that, that they're not happy with either.
So if you see that at your workplace, or if you sense this is what's happening in here, and the other person is withdrawal, or maybe with the body language, either they are not happy to participate in the group therapy or something, anything like that, would you be the first person to approach, and how would you approach to that that person who has not known any other way to deal with conflict.
Yeah. You want to take that?
Sure. I think the first thing that comes up for me is you mentioned in a workplace. So one of the things to be really conscious of and aware of is when in your workplace, what are the guidelines? Is there guidelines available to you on what you're supposed to do if there's a conflict that arises? Is there someone that you can talk to? And I think generally the first course of action is to approach that person,
So, yeah,
right?
one-to-one,
Yeah, one-to-one in a way that's not
Threatening,
non-threatening. And one of the ways that I always like to encourage people to express themselves is just through really talking about how the other person's actions made them feel. So how they're feeling in that moment. Not to say that you did this and now I'm yeah, but it's more about saying, I felt this way the other, when this so and so happened, or I've noticed that we haven't been speaking that much lately. Is there something that I've done that we need to talk about, or is there something that you wanted to ask me about or talk about? So really putting yourself out there, being vulnerable in that you're acknowledging that you may have played a part in that situation.
And Lissette, I really like the phrase when you say I. You have been using the word I instead of calling it we.
Right.
Because when you say I, you are taking the ownership that I am feeling that.
Absolutely.
And if you say we, that I'm including Ofir, I'm including you, I'm including everybody in here. And that may not be the case in here. So if you put the onus on you, it's better that that person be able to speak up a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and sort of to the other piece of the question that you asked around what we do in our sessions, I think it is our onus. Anytime we see any behavior that then somehow triggers the other person, to call that out, to notice that ourselves, and then to be able to point it out. And the way I like to do it, in one of the first sort of stages of couples therapy that I work with, is really being able to show the person how their behavior is impacting the other person. So I might say something like, I just noticed when you put your finger out and you increased your volume and then said that statement in that tone, then I noticed you turning away and kind of looking down with sort of, this kind of look on your face, right? The specific thing I would see. And then I would try to break it down and say, well, when she did that, how did you interpret that, right? And then when you interpret it that way, what did you tell yourself? And when you tell that to yourself, what's that like to experience, right? Now we're getting at something more raw, their actual primary experience. And then I might say, what would it be like to actually turn to your partner and to share this? And then I might ask them, is this how he normally would share, or does this look different? And generally it's different, right? Because instead of now withdrawing, looking away, he's engaging, right? He's engaging, and that's very different. And then we coach the receiving partner to hear it in a way, and like we talked about earlier, that you guys talked about earlier, around taking accountability, the only thing that's shared between the two worlds, the two people, is the behavior, right? Everyone can agree on what the behavior was, but now we're taking ownership over what I thought your intention was, what I said to myself about that intention, and how that affected me. And that's very both empowering to say. It could be very scary at first because we don't know how the other person's going to respond. But if we say it directly, right, and in this vulnerable way, and when I say vulnerable, I mean a direct experience. And a direct experience would consist of words like hurt, sadness, it might be shame, it might be anger, right? It's whatever it is that's coming up for us in that moment. That's the direct experience, right? And it makes no reference to the other person. The only thing that's in reference to the other person is that person's behavior. But everything else we own, right? And then that, when they express that, it's a lot less threatening. There's no blame in that, and there's full ownership, and that generally looks different than the way that they normally interact.
Thank you to both of you. We are running out of time, and thank you for the caller that wanted this question to be answered, and I hope you got something out of it. And also, I would like you to leave your email address, so if you have a question for them that they will want them to answer it for the next time when they come here, please send your question to your counseling, your info at
nofearcounseling.com.
No
Yeah,
Fear.
hopefully we'll have it at the bottom of the screen,
we
and
will give you the email address.
we'd be happy to answer the questions.
Thank you to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
again for having us.
Thank you, Ofir and Lissette, for your insight into maintaining healthy relationships. If you have any questions for them, please email it to asianpulse@gmail.com or info@nofearcounseling.com.